Leadership often looks powerful from the outside. Authority, respect, decision-making control. People assume that as you rise, things become clearer, more stable, more secure. But something quieter can happen too. As responsibility increases, connection sometimes decreases. And the higher someone climbs, the fewer places they have to exhale. Loneliness at the top rarely looks dramatic. It doesn't always feel like isolation in an empty room. It can feel like being surrounded by people, but not fully known by any of them. Conversations change. Peers become subordinates. Casual honesty becomes filtered. Vulnerability feels riskier. And slowly, without anyone announcing it, emotional distance grows. There's a psychological shift that happens when others begin looking to you for direction. You stop being one of the group, even if you still feel like the same person inside. Your words carry more weight. Your reactions influence morale. Your mood sets tone. And that awareness creates caution. Leaders often think before speaking more carefully than they used to. They measure what they reveal. They manage what they express, not out of manipulation, out of responsibility. But that emotional filtering has a cost. At lower levels, frustration can be vented sideways. Colleagues share complaints. Stress is mutual. At the top, that outlet narrows. Who do you speak openly with when you are the final decision maker? Who do you confide in when you're the one others depend on for stability? That asymmetry creates quiet isolation, even in successful careers. There's also something subtle about authority that affects relationships. When someone holds power, even if they don't misuse it, others adjust around them. Conversations become slightly more cautious. Disagreements soften. Feedback becomes measured. And while that may protect hierarchy, it can reduce authenticity. Leaders often sense this shift. They notice when people hesitate, when opinions are withheld, when rooms feel slightly more formal than they used to. And sensing that distance can intensify loneliness. It's not always about ego. It's about human wiring. Humans regulate stress socially. We decompress through shared experience. When that sharing becomes limited, stress becomes more internal. Leaders may carry decisions alone. Strategic concerns, financial pressures, personnel dilemmas, outwardly composed, inwardly processing. The responsibility doesn't disappear at the end of the day. It follows them home. There's another layer that rarely gets acknowledged. As status increases, expectations increase too. Strength, confidence, clarity. Leaders are often seen as stabilizing figures, and while that role can feel meaningful, it can also feel constraining. Because there are days when leaders feel uncertain, days when they don't have perfect answers, days when they question themselves. But showing too much uncertainty can feel risky, so doubts are processed privately. And private processing, over time, can feel isolating. Interestingly, loneliness at the top doesn't always correlate with how many people someone manages. It correlates more with perceived emotional distance. A leader can have a large team and still feel deeply alone, because connection isn't about proximity, it's about psychological safety. And leaders often create safety for others, without always receiving it themselves. Some leaders adapt by becoming highly self-reliant. They internalize stress. They detach slightly. They build thicker emotional boundaries. That resilience can look impressive, but emotional self-sufficiency isn't the same as connection. And humans, regardless of rank, need connection. Even those who appear strongest. There's also the paradox of visibility. Leaders are more visible than most, observed, evaluated, interpreted. But visibility doesn't guarantee understanding. In fact, sometimes the more visible someone becomes, the more misunderstood they feel. Because people see the role, not always the person inside it. And yet, despite this, many leaders rarely talk about loneliness. It can feel contradictory. You have influence, authority, opportunity. Admitting isolation might feel ungrateful or weak, so the feeling stays quiet, unspoken, but common. If you've ever stepped into leadership and noticed this subtle shift, you're not imagining it. It's not a personal flaw, it's a structural dynamic. Power changes relational patterns. Responsibility narrows emotional outlets. Authority increases distance, even when warmth remains. Understanding that doesn't eliminate loneliness, but it reframes it. There's something grounding about realizing this isn't unique to you. Many leaders quietly navigate this internal landscape. balancing composure with doubt, strength with vulnerability, responsibility with human need, and the ones who recognize the psychology behind it often manage it better. Not by pretending it doesn't exist, but by acknowledging it internally, by building intentional spaces where they can be unfiltered, by remembering that leadership doesn't require emotional isolation. Because at the end of the day, titles don't override biology. No matter how high someone climbs, they remain human, still wired for connection, still affected by distance, still sensitive to emotional climate. Leadership may reduce peer-level symmetry, but it doesn't erase the need for shared understanding. Workplaces rarely talk about this side of authority. They focus on strategy, performance, growth. But the emotional architecture of leadership matters too. Because sustainable leadership isn't just about competence, it's about psychological endurance, and endurance becomes harder in isolation. Loneliness at the top isn't a contradiction, it's a consequence of how hierarchy reshapes relationships, and recognizing that might not solve it entirely, but it brings clarity, and clarity often softens what feels personal. Work becomes easier to interpret when you understand the psychology shaping it. Check out the next video here, where we break down why small talk at work can feel so tiring. It dives into the hidden social effort behind those everyday conversations. Thanks for spending time with me today. If you made it this far, you're already ahead of the game. See you in the next one.